The morning of Liam's funeral was unnaturally quiet. No wind rustled the leaves, no birds dared to sing. Just the slow creak of worn church doors and the heavy footsteps of mourners dragging their grief behind them. I stood at the edge of the crowd, not ready to step forward. My hands trembled as I clutched a crumpled tissue, but no tears came. I was hollow. My son, my only child, was gone. 24 years old, bright, kind, full of ridiculous ideas and impossible dreams, and now he was just a framed photograph surrounded by white lilies. The cause of death had been ruled an overdose.
Heroin.
I didn't believe it for a second. Liam hated needles. Even in the hospital for his tonsil surgery, he turned pale at the sight of N4. He never touched anything stronger than a beer at his worst. But the coroner was quick, the police quicker, and the case was closed almost before I could breathe. What cut deeper than anything was the speed at which his friends vanished. A few vague texts, a half-hearted condolence message on social media, then nothing. His girlfriend, Trisha, hadn't even shown up to the funeral. She'd been with him for 2 years, practically lived at our house. I didn't understand how someone could disappear so completely. And yet, here I was, staring at the freshly dug earth as his coffin sank into the ground, the priest murmuring something about peace and rest. My heart was still screaming. Days blurred after that. I stopped checking the calendar. I ate because Nora, my sister, forced me to. She stayed for a week, organizing the funeral, handling the guests, making sure I didn't collapse. But even she couldn't understand the ache that pulsed with every breath. When she left, the silence returned, heavier than before. The house still smelled like Liam, his cologne, his shampoo, the old hoodie he always left draped over the couch. I wandered through the rooms like a ghost, touching the edges of his life that remained. His bedroom was the hardest. It was just as he left it. Laptop on the desk, charger half pulled from the wall, a few socks on the floor, a nearly empty mug on the windowsill. His sneakers still by the bed, as if he'd come back and slipped them on. I didn't dare move anything. It felt like disturbing a crime scene, though nobody else seemed to see it that way. One evening, when I couldn't sleep, I found myself standing in his room again. The moonlight cast pale shadows across the furniture. I sat on his desk chair and spun it slowly, not sure why. And then I saw it, a notebook tucked behind the monitor, its leather cover barely peeking out. I froze. Liam never kept diaries, not that I knew of. I reached for it slowly, heart pounding louder than the creaking of the chair. The moment my fingers touched the worn leather, I felt something shift inside me. It was heavy, thick with pages, with his name scribbled on the inside cover. The first page started off like a journal. Dates, rants, some deep personal reflections, things I'd never heard him say aloud.
But a few pages in, the tone changed.
Suddenly, he was writing names. Trisha, Raymond, Uncle Mike. There were notes about bank accounts, strange transactions, a company I'd never heard of called Alveron Holdings. Paragraphs about his trust fund, how he'd recently found out that his father had set up a sizable inheritance for him, one he could access after his 25th birthday. He had planned to invest it into a nonprofit, something about local shelters. But he was worried. He wrote about how people around him had started acting strangely, how Trisha was pushing him to make big decisions about his money, how Raymond kept inviting him to parties, trying to get him loosened up. Liam didn't sound paranoid. He sounded careful. His writing was sharp, alert. He mentioned once that he thought his phone was being tracked. He even said he was considering talking to a lawyer, but didn't want to make a scene without proof. I stared at the pages, rereading the same lines again and again. My hands trembled. Every sentence was a thread, unraveling the story I had been told. My son didn't die of an overdose. He was silenced.
Because he knew something.
Because he was planning to do something good with the money others had expected him to hand over quietly. I didn't sleep that night. I read every word, flipping through the pages like they held oxygen. There were names I recognized, family, friends, old neighbors, and others I didn't. A man called Ivan kept appearing. Liam had written dangerous next to his name. No last name. Just a chilling sentence. If anything happens to me, it's not an accident. Start with Ivan. Trust no one. The next morning, I called the police station. They brushed me off. I was told the case was closed, the toxicology report was clean, and unless I had new physical evidence, there was nothing they could do. I tried to mention the diary. They said personal notes weren't enough. I hung up, my hands trembling. The next call was to Liam's bank. They wouldn't tell me anything either. Apparently, all his accounts had been handled by the executor, his Uncle Mike. I didn't even know he was named executor. Mike had barely come to the funeral, said a few words, and disappeared. Now it made sense. I felt my pulse quicken. The diary said Mike had tried to get Liam to sign some papers a few weeks before his death. Liam wrote that he felt uncomfortable with it, that he told Mike he'd rather wait and review things with a financial advisor. That was 2 weeks before he died. I needed help, but I didn't know who to trust. Even Nora had once said that Mike was just trying to help.
If she was wrong about him, who else was I wrong about?
I decided to visit Trisha. I hadn't seen her since the week Liam died. Her number was disconnected, but I remembered where she lived. When I knocked on her apartment door, no one answered.
I tried the doorman.
He said she moved out 2 days after the funeral.
No forwarding address.
My chest tightened. It was like she vanished. I knew she didn't have family in town. Her car was gone, her social media wiped clean. I felt sick. Someone was covering tracks fast. I went home and took photos of every page of the diary. Then I printed the most critical ones, anything with names, timelines, or suspicions. I hid the original copy in a sealed envelope and slipped it inside an old cereal box in the kitchen cabinet, behind all the other unopened ones. Paranoia? Maybe. But after reading my son's words, paranoia felt like common sense. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat at the dining table and stared out the window at the streetlights flickering in the dark. Somewhere out there were the people who had smiled at me at the funeral, hugged me, whispered fake sympathies. People who had known more than they said, who had watched Liam die, maybe even planned it. I didn't know how yet, but I was going to uncover everything. I owed it to my son. He may have left this world with no justice, but he had left a trail. And I was going to follow it, step by step, until every name in that diary meant something, and paid for it that I began with the one name that stood out most, Ivan. There was no last name, but Liam had circled it 3 times and written Ridgewater Club underneath. I knew the place. It was a private lounge downtown that catered to the wealthier crowd. Liam had never mentioned going there, but perhaps he'd followed someone or met Ivan through someone else. I drove by the building a few times before finding the courage to go in. It looked more like an old mansion than a club. Grand pillars, glass doors, men in press suits smoking outside like they owned the city. I didn't belong, and I knew it the second I stepped in. But I didn't care. Inside, the air reeked of leather and expensive cologne. I spotted a hostess and asked casually about Ivan. Her smile tightened, and she said she wasn't familiar with the name. But her eyes flicked just slightly toward the hallway before returning to mine. That was all I needed. I walked past her like I belonged, down the corridor, and found a door with a frosted glass panel. I didn't knock. The room was empty. A dim office, cluttered with papers and liquor bottles. I scanned the shelves until I found a photo. 4 men, arms around each other, raising glasses. One of them was Mike. Another looked vaguely familiar from some charity event Liam had once dragged me to. The third was Raymond, Liam's so-called friend. The 4th man had a silver watch and sharp eyes. On the back of the photo was a scribbled note. To old times. RC. I snapped a picture and left. Back home, I searched everything I could find on Ridgewater Club and the initials RC. I discovered that the club was once a networking hub for small business elites, but in recent years had been mentioned in online forums as a front. The words were vague, things like laundered deals and ghost accounts, nothing solid. But then I remembered something. Liam once said Mike offered to invest some of his trust into a joint venture. He had written about it in the diary. Alveron Holdings. That was the next thread I pulled. I searched corporate databases and found the name listed under 5 shell companies, all cross-owned by other entities that traced back to Ridgewater Club. There was no physical address, just a P.O. box. The more I searched, the deeper it went. It wasn't just about money. These people were hiding millions in dummy trusts and real estate fraud. And my son, my sweet, good-hearted son, had been planning to pull his money out. He wasn't just a liability. He was a threat. The first real twist came when I received a letter. No return address, just my name scrawled in shaky handwriting. Inside was a single sentence typed on clean white paper. "Stop digging or you'll end up like him." My hands shook. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then I took a photo, sealed the letter in a plastic bag, and hid it alongside the diary. But I didn't stop. I started documenting everything. Every person I spoke to, every lead I found, every time I caught someone watching the house. I stopped answering unknown calls. I bought a burner phone and used it to contact a journalist I remembered from a town council corruption scandal a few years back. I didn't give her my name, only the diary entries and the connections I had mapped. She listened. She asked for time. I gave her copies of what I had, nothing traceable to me, but enough to prove that something big was hidden behind Ridgewater. Then came the second twist. I was in the grocery store, thinking I saw Raymond in the parking lot. I wasn't sure. He vanished before I could get close. That night, someone broke into my house. They didn't steal anything, not even Liam's laptop or the TV. But they had gone through his room. Drawers open, closet doors swinging. The cereal box was moved. They were looking for the diary. I knew then that I had to move faster. I took the original and hid it in a storage locker 2 towns over, under a fake name. I paid for it 6 months in advance. The burner phone rang 2 days later. It was the journalist. She said she had found a link between Alveron Holdings and a former city planner who had recently retired after being accused of contract fraud. She believed Liam had accidentally uncovered how several public funds had been diverted into these shell companies. The money trail was dirty, long, and buried under legal noise. But the pattern was there, and the names matched the ones in the diary. I felt vindicated, but also scared. If what she said was true, Liam hadn't just stumbled into family greed. He had uncovered municipal corruption involving city officials, developers, and private investors. And someone had decided that his silence was more valuable than his life. The final twist of that week shattered me. I received an email from Liam's old college friend, someone I hadn't seen in years. The subject line read, "I think I know what happened." Attached was a voice note. It was Liam from a week before he died. He was nervous, stuttering, but determined. He said he had met with someone named Ivan and recorded their conversation. He was planning to take it to the media, but didn't want to alert his family just yet. He said, "If you're hearing this, it means something went wrong. I knew they'd try to stop me." I played that voice message over and over, clutching my chest like I could still reach into the past and hold him. My son had been scared, but he'd been brave. He'd tried to stop them. They silenced him, but he left echoes. I wasn't alone anymore. The journalist wanted to meet in person. She said she was bringing an investigator and that they were going to take this to someone higher up. I agreed. We picked a coffee shop in a neighboring town. But the next morning, as I was getting ready, I received a second letter. No envelope this time. Just slipped under my door. 5 words in large red ink. "You're next. Leave it buried." I didn't flinch. I didn't pause. I packed a bag, grabbed the burner phone, and took the back alley out of my own home. I didn't know who was watching or how close they were, but I knew one thing. I had just crossed a line I could never come back from. The truth was burning, ready to ignite. And I had no choice now but to light the match. The coffee shop was small, quiet, tucked between a laundromat and a pawn store, hardly the kind of place where conspiracies unraveled. I arrived early and sat facing the window, back to the wall, just as Liam used to do when he felt uneasy. The journalist came in 15 minutes later, alone. No investigator. She looked tired, eyes scanning the room like someone already regretting her choices. She slid into the seat across from me and placed her phone between us. Her voice was low as she told me the investigator had pulled out. He'd received a call late the night before, no threats, just a friendly warning about his license renewal. She didn't blame him. She almost didn't come herself. But then she said she'd lost a brother to a lie once. That was enough. She handed me a folder. Inside were public records, financial disclosures, and something more chilling, a security camera still from a gas station near Liam's apartment. It was time-stamped 2 nights before his death. The image showed Liam arguing with 2 men. One of them was Mike. The other, after a bit of image enhancement, turned out to be Ivan Russo, a name I now recognized from a fraud case buried 5 years ago. The charges had disappeared, along with the witnesses. My breath caught. That image was more than a coincidence. It was a thread, tight and unraveling. Liam hadn't been paranoid. He had been hunted. What I didn't expect was what happened next. The journalist, visibly nervous, confessed that her phone had been cloned. Her emails were being monitored, and someone had accessed her cloud storage. She believed someone on the inside was feeding updates to the same network of people Liam had exposed. As she slid the phone across the table, a name flashed on the screen, Raymond. He'd been calling her anonymously. She traced it back to an offshore number, but had voice samples to confirm it was him. She believed he was trying to cover his own tracks by shifting blame. He told her in one message that Trisha had been in deeper than she knew. That's when everything tilted. Trisha had always been the wild card. Gone too quickly, disappeared too cleanly. Now there was evidence she'd been coached, manipulated, maybe even used as the bait to get close to Liam's finances. The journalist thought she might have flipped sides, maybe tried to warn Liam in the end. A screenshot from a deleted message supported it. Trisha had sent Liam a voice memo the night before his death. It was corrupted, but the metadata remained. The timestamp aligned with when Liam's phone was mysteriously wiped by a system update. Someone had gone to great lengths to erase it all. I left the cafe, with my mind spinning. The twists came faster now. Back at the storage unit, I found the door ajar. The lock was still there but sawed through cleanly. Inside, the diary was gone. My breath stalled, chest hollowed. But I had prepared for this. A second copy, buried deeper in a locked case hidden behind paint cans and a rusted toolbox, remained untouched. I pulled it out, hands cold. The enemy was closer than I thought.
Someone was tracking my moves step by step.
I changed hotels that night and paid in cash. I left my old phone in a dumpster and smashed the SIM. The burner was all I trusted now. I sent a coded message to the journalist, warning her. The next morning, the headlines shocked me. Her name was trending, but not for the investigation. An anonymous source had leaked fake photos of her in compromising positions, along with claims that she was taking bribes from political groups. Her reputation was under assault. And just like that, she was discredited. The story, for the public, died before it was even born. But it wasn't over. That same day, I received an unmarked flash drive in my mailbox, wrapped in black cloth. I plugged it into an old laptop and found a single video. Liam, sitting in a car, hidden camera recording. His voice was quiet but firm as he confronted Mike and Ivan. He told them he knew about the fund transfers, the dummy accounts, the shell companies. He demanded they back off. The men laughed. Ivan said something chilling, that Liam would regret crossing them. The last frame was Liam reaching for the door handle, but the image froze there. I replayed the clip a dozen times. It was real. It was the proof I needed. The flash drive also contained backup copies of the diary entries, plus scanned documents of bank transfers from Mike's account into Alvaron Holdings. My hands trembled. Someone had sent this to help. A ghost from inside the circle? A turncoat? I didn't know, but I had to move fast. I compiled the files and sent them to 3 independent journalists, foreign, small outfits not tied to local politics. I scheduled the emails using a delayed release. If anything happened to me, the truth would still spread. The next twist came that night. I returned to my temporary apartment and found the front door open. I approached slowly, every step measured. The place was empty, but on the kitchen table was a photo. Liam, As a child, at his 5th birthday, icing smeared across his face, sitting on my lap. Written across it in red ink. Last chance. Shut it down. My knees buckled. They weren't just threatening me. They were reminding me how deep they had gone. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about power, and I had underestimated how far they would go to keep it. That night, I made a decision. I reached out to someone I had avoided all along, Detective Elwood. Retired, once respected, now quietly gardening in the suburbs. He had investigated corruption years ago and was forced into early retirement. I told him everything. At first, he listened like he didn't want to believe it. But when I showed him the flash drive, the photos, the diary pages, something in his face changed. He asked for 24 hours. I gave him everything I had, duplicates of all files. If I vanished, he'd be next in line to blow this open. But I wasn't ready to disappear just yet. The next morning, I found an obituary that made my blood run cold. Raymond had died, car crash, single vehicle, no witnesses. Police ruled it an accident. No autopsy ordered. Just like Liam.
Clean. Silent.
Efficient. I realized then that the noose was tightening, and whoever had sent the flash drive was either next or already gone. I had to disappear again, but this time I left a trail behind me. Just enough to be found if things went wrong. Just enough to keep the pressure on. The final twist of that day came when I received an email. No subject. No signature. Just one line. Trisha is alive. She wants to talk. I stared at the screen for a long time, heart pounding. The girl I thought had vanished was somewhere out there. Hiding? Running? Regretting? I didn't know. But I knew one thing. If she was alive, she had answers. And if she was willing to talk, everything was about to change, that I didn't sleep that night. The email kept replaying in my mind like a broken tape. Trisha is alive. She wants to talk. It felt like a thread suddenly pulled loose from the tightly woven fabric of lies surrounding Liam's death. I waited for another message, some contact number, a location, anything. But hours passed in silence. Finally, just as dawn began to gray the horizon, another message arrived. It contained coordinates. No explanation, no time, just a location pinned to an abandoned train station 30 miles outside the city. It was the kind of place where cell signals went to die and where people went to disappear. Still, I knew I had to go. I didn't tell anyone, not even Elwood. I took a cab halfway, then switched to a rental under a fake name. The air was thick with autumn chill by the time I arrived, wind rattling through broken windows and rusting metal beams. Inside, the echo of my own footsteps unnerved me. Then I saw her. Trisha stepped from behind a pillar like a ghost resurrected. Her eyes were sunken, face paler, thinner than I remembered. She looked like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. Without a word, she handed me a USB and a crumpled envelope. Her hands trembled as she motioned for me to read. The letter was written in Liam's handwriting, dated 2 days before his death. In it, he explained everything. He had found out that Mike had been forging signatures. Liam's name was used to approve a property transfer that diverted funds from the trust into Ivan's offshore accounts. When Liam confronted Mike, he threatened to go public. That night, Trisha overheard a phone call. Mike telling Ivan that the boy's not going to be a problem anymore. She begged Liam to leave town, but he refused. He told her he had sent the diary to someone he trusted, someone who would act if anything happened. Trisha said she tried to warn him again the next day, but when she arrived at his apartment, he was already gone. She didn't wait. She disappeared, cut ties, changed phones, and went underground. For months, she stayed hidden. But then 2 weeks ago, she was followed. That's when she knew someone had realized she wasn't dead. She feared for her life, but even more, she feared what would happen if the truth stayed buried. The USB she gave me held something damning, a video taken from her phone, secretly recorded. It showed Ivan and Mike in a heated conversation inside Ridgewater Club's private room. The audio was rough, but clear enough to catch phrases like trust fund tied up and he's getting too close. There was also a name I hadn't heard before, Councilman Farley. a local politician who had championed youth employment programs and urban development. Liam had written briefly about Farley in the diary, noting how he found it odd that city grant money kept disappearing after being donated to community partnerships connected to Alveron Holdings. It clicked. Farley was the public face. Ivan and Mike were the operators. And my son had stumbled into the center of it. I took the USB, stuffed it in my coat, and asked Trisha, without words, if she was coming with me. She shook her head and slipped away into the shadows, disappearing once more. I didn't follow. Back in the city, I met Elwood again. He looked grimmer than ever. He had been digging into the financial records I'd given him, and what he found sickened even him. Farley had orchestrated dozens of fund transfers using dummy nonprofits, each linked back to Alveron. It was a criminal ecosystem masquerading as philanthropy. We were sitting on evidence that could destroy lives, collapse careers, but also cost us everything. That night, I received a voicemail from a blocked number. It played the sound of my front door creaking open, footsteps moving across floorboards, then a whisper. Tick-tock. I had no doubt my apartment was compromised. Elwood insisted I relocate. He had a safe house. I didn't ask who owned it or how he had access. I just went. We worked in secret for a week. The journalist, though disgraced, kept feeding us more data from old contacts. A digital trail formed. Every alias, every transfer, every offshore account was connected with near mathematical precision. It was no longer a question of if they killed Liam, but how to prove it in a way that the law couldn't ignore. The problem was someone else was working faster. First, the man who notarized Liam's documents was found dead. Car accident again. Then the financial analyst who had once audited Alveron was reported missing. The message was clear. Each move we made was being watched. I checked the files every night, made redundant backups, mailed hard copies to multiple lawyers. But then, one morning, the worst blow came. Elwood didn't show up. I called and texted nothing. I drove to the safe house. It was empty.
Door unlocked.
A cup of coffee on the counter still warm. On the mirror in the bathroom, someone had written in fog, "You're next." I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I copied every file again, booked a ticket to another city under a different name, and went underground. From a hotel room 3 states away, I released the entire cache to 5 investigative outlets. Videos, voice notes, financials, diary entries, death reports, everything. Then I waited. The news hit within 48 hours. Trust fund scandal linked to death of local tech heir. City councilman implicated in financial fraud. Whistleblower diary sparks federal inquiry. I watched the headlines roll in. I watched Farley resign. I watched Ivan flee the country. I watched Mike get arrested at his lakeside home, a smug expression erased as cameras caught him being led away. And then, one night, I received an email. No words, just a photo. Liam's grave, covered in fresh flowers. No card. No name. But I knew it was Trisha. The fallout was swift. Investigations unraveled a decades-long operation. Funds recovered. Properties seized. The city was rattled to its core. But none of it brought Liam back. The story never once called it murder. The official record still said overdose. No arrests for that. No justice in the way I had imagined. But the truth lived now, louder than their lies. I returned home 6 months later. Quietly. No one followed. I visited Liam's grave, sat beside it in the cool grass, and placed the original cake photo on the headstone. Not as a reminder of pain, but of defiance. Of what we uncovered. Of what they tried to hide. Sometimes justice doesn't come like a gavel or a sentence. Sometimes it comes as silence, finally unbroken. I stood and walked away, heart heavy but whole. I had buried a son. But I had also buried a lie. And somewhere in between I found myself again. Not as a mother grieving, but as a fighter who refused to forget.